Hi, and welcome to the Red Tunic Podcast, a podcast where I look to rediscover what makes gaming fun and enjoyable by having positive conversations with those related to the industry. My name is Link, and today I'm joined by Jason Smith, an indie game developer that is currently working on the retro FPS shooter Cultic. Hi, Jason. How are you doing today?
Not doing too bad yourself.
I'm doing all right, Jason. Thanks for asking. Now, before we get started, if you don't mind telling my listeners or the listeners a little bit about yourself for those that don't know who you are.
Sure. So, as you already spoiled, my name's Jason Smith. I'm a I'm a one-man army game developer from the central United States, and I'm working on the retro shooter Cultic. It's been in progress since about January of this year. It was just kind of a side project for me that I worked on in my spare time, and then it kind of blew up a little bit. And now, as of September, it's actually in my full-time job. So I I'm almost 30, but I finally hit my lifelong dream of being a game developer. So there you go.
And that's absolutely fantastic. And I didn't realize that you had only been doing this since like the beginning of the year, more and or less.
Right.
Um, so you've I just want to say it's a very fantastic game for the amount of time you've been working on. Now, I'm not to say that you know I wouldn't say anything different if it was like 3 years in development. I'm just meaning it's it's much further along than I would have thought. Or sorry, you've been working on it for less time than I would have thought, and it's much further along than I would have uh, guessed based on that.
Yeah.
I'm saying weird things. I'm
No,
sorry.
I get what you mean. I'm definitely very happy to be working on it full time now because it was kind of a like my because of my self-imposed deadlines and then later my 3D Realms imposed deadlines. I was really working on it like anytime I wasn't at my day job, I was pretty much working on Cultic. So it was a lot of late nights, a lot of burnout, and it's really nice to have my free time back now that I can work on it during the day. So, but yeah, it's a lot of work has gone into it, especially since I'm doing pretty much everything: music, sound, models, code. So it's a very slow process, but I'm really happy to be where I am and hoping that with the new schedule and all the new dev hours that I'm able to churn out new content and move much quicker, and my deadlines for release won't be so terrifying eventually, and just keep moving things forward.
And again, that's great to hear. And also, congratulations on um, finding the publisher, working it out with 3D Realms. I don't exactly know how all of that works, so I'm aware that what I'm saying is kind of clunky. But congratulations on the publishing, what have you.
Yeah, thanks. I wouldn't say that I found them as much as they found me. That was the game was barely like, oh gosh, it was like maybe one. I think I had like the lever action weapon sprite done and like the first version of the axe cultist done, and I was still working on like the basic movement and basic enemy AI, and I had like one little test area. Like the game was nowhere. And I had posted a few things on Twitter, and they had kind of blown up just because of the art style. Anything that's got a nice retro aesthetic to it usually picks up a little bit of steam nowadays, just because the retro revival is kind of still in full swing. And then yeah, it was like, gosh, maybe late February, 3D Realms reached out to me, and of course, I grew up playing retro shooters and 3D Realms games, and so that was pretty surprising to me. And I figured they were just asking about the project or something, but then they were like, "Hey, we really like the look of this, and we think it should be a 3D Realms game." And I was like, "What?" Sorry, it's 7 in the morning. I must not have heard you guys quite right. Which is crazy because the game, like I said, it was nothing. There wasn't even, there wasn't a single playable map. It was just one little like 30-meter wide test area. So that was pretty crazy. And then, so you kind of put together a little proof of concept for them, and they still wanted to move forward. And they were like, "Well, do you think we can have a demo ready by August?" And I was like, "That sure." and then, and then we made it happen. But yeah, it's been really exciting. They've been really great to work with, and they provide a lot of resources and a lot of expertise, and they have a lot of they just had, they've got folks working with them from all kinds of backgrounds, and they're working on all kinds of projects and all kinds of engines, and so it's been really cool to see, like, the inner workings of like an actual game studio, and have that support. But they've also been great about letting me be flexible and kind of letting me direct Cultic with my own vision in mind. I'm sure would prefer that I let them give me more staff, so that the game could progress faster. But I don't think it's quite ready for that yet. Yeah, it's been really really cool.
And again, that's fantastic to hear. And I don't recall when I first stumbled upon finding you on Twitter. I do remember though the when you were doing the testing in that, like you said, that like 30 by 30 or whatever room, where you were testing the I think it was the axes bouncing off of each other or something like that. And the I was really looking forward to what was going to come of it, just because and I hope you take this as a compliment, just because I don't know. But I was really hoping you were going to continue because I got a lot of heavy blood vibes from it,
Uh huh.
and I don't know why, but for whatever reason, um, I personally, they could be existing, and I'm just unaware of it. But I just haven't seen a lot of games that had that same blood aesthetic. We've seen the aesthetic for like Duke Nukem 3D with Ion Fury, I want to say it is.
Right.
Also, I think published by 3D Realms. Um,
Yep.
and like I've seen all the other aesthetics that tie to different games, but I was really excited because this one just reminded me so much of Blood, and I really just wanted to see more of it. And I'm very happy to see more of it, and was very happy to get to try the demo with Realms Deep, and suggested it to a bunch of people. My father being one, someone who very much should not have been letting me play these video games as like a 7 or 8 year old, but
Yep. Yep.
is what
I
that
w-
is.
I pretty much grew up in that same boat.
Um, Now that's going to lead to this next question. Then, um, was your mother aware, and how did she feel if she was?
Of the games that my dad let my brother and I play. Oh, I'm sure she knew. I never got in trouble for it though. But at the time, so as a kid, I was really into. I played like Dark Forces and Doom and Blood and Duke Nukem, and we had like Resident Evil 2 on the console, and so I was always really into like horror movies and horror games and things that were a little more violent in nature. Um, just like I played those more than I did, like kids maybe games that kids should be playing. But the problem more so was that as a kid, I went to a private religious school, very, very, very conservative, very, very, very like fundamentalist, and so those kind of things were frowned upon. And so so I didn't really get in trouble for it at home, but I would get in trouble for when I drew pictures of like of like stuff like shooting zombies, or was like trying to find sticks on the playground that looked like guns, or snuck my scary stories to tell in the dark book to school with me. Stuff like that was more what got me in trouble. And it was also very difficult, to make friends in an environment like that, where it's like you're the only kid in your class who's allowed to like play video games or read Harry Potter or watch cable television. And so it's like, oh man. So um yeah, it was definitely interesting growing up like that, but I wouldn't trade it for anything. So
So just jumping off of that, and I mean absolutely no disrespect when I say this, as someone who grew up going through the Catholic school system in Canada, which isn't so much a private school.
uh-huh.
However, it's like it's like a half private that's funded by the church and the public system anyway. Um, I find it very amusing that you you were coming from that kind of background for schooling and such, and that is where all of the tension, if you will, or headbutting came from what you like to watch and what you like to read and what you like to play. If only because right from the get go for me, my mother was always upset with it. My father's system was um, sitting me down in front of Doom and going, "What are these?" And me going, "Well, they're zombies." "Okay, are you okay? Are you allowed to kill zombies?" I'm like, "Well, yeah, they're evil." He went, "Okay, are they humans?" "No." "What don't you kill then?" "Humans." He went, "No problem solved." That was that was his big brain play of it.
Unless they're Nazis. That's the important differentiator. And
It took
virtual Nazis. Virtual
it,
Nazis. Virtual Nazis. 3D ones. Sorry,
um,
I'm
it
gonna get
took
that out there.
it took a while before we got to Wolfenstein. Um, so that one didn't actually come up. By the time I did get to Wolfenstein, I was old enough to have already come to that conclusion on my own. Um,
Yeah.
which
I feel like that conversation about zombies versus humans falls apart when you play like Medal of Honor. He's like, "What are those?" Oh, those are soldiers fighting for their homeland. Well, okay. Well, you can shoot those guys. Their ideologies are a little bit different than yours.
um so yes, I understand in most families that would most likely be a very interesting topic to have to bridge. Um, for me personally, I am the byproduct of a Canadian Frenchman and a German woman that it's from Germany. My grandfather met her in Germany, and she never really shied away from absolutely speaking ill against those atrocities. So
Yeah.
for me, even from a young age, that ideology was well established. So
Well, that's good.
sorry, a little bit of a tangent there.
All
Um,
good.
so Jason, you kind of you kind of answered a little bit of this. Um, however, I'm going to ask a little more explicitly, and feel free to gloss over it with if we've already answered parts of it or you feel you answered it before. But how exactly did you get into developing and making video games?
Well, obviously, as we kind of talked about, I was a gamer from an early age, and so like when I was young, or like younger, like 5 years old or so, I would whenever we were doing like coloring in classes, a lot of times me and like my if I the like one kid I knew in class who had also played a video game, we would sometimes doodle like title screens for like games that we would make up. So we just like make up this, be like, oh, this would be a really cool game, have X, Y, and Z in it, and it would have this kind of character, and then we would draw it on like construction paper. But the thing that we always got a kick out of was we would always write out like start game and options on there, and I always thought it was hilarious to put the options thing on there. So I would say that was that was my first experience with UI design. Was those those menu screens on construction paper, which look only a little bit worse than my UIs today. But then eventually, when I got a little more comfortable with like a computer, beyond just just playing games on it, I started figuring out how to animate because I really wanted to learn how to animate. And by animate, I mean I figured out how to set the slide transition time in PowerPoint to a tenth of a second, which is kind of like animating. That's like a Star Fox frame rate. Um, so I started making really stupid cartoons in PowerPoint, and I'd generate these PowerPoint files that had like 600 slides in them. And of course, our poor Dell Dimension 3200 would just absolutely crawl when you tried to open up a PowerPoint that large. But then eventually, I got turned on to Flash and downloaded a perfectly legal version of Flash. Um, and that was of course much better. So and that was like in the era of like the early 2000s when like stick figure flash videos on the internet were really popular, and the golden days. And so I kind of learned how to do animation that way. Moved away from doing like sprite videos into more of like stick figure videos and stuff like that. And then eventually decided that I wanted to make. I didn't just want to animate. I wanted to make games too. And so I tried doing that just with like point and click stuff in Flash, but I didn't really understand ActionScript at all. It was a little too complicated for me. And then a friend of mine on good old MSN Messenger that I talked to, um, but turned me on to GameMaker, which I think believe it was GameMaker 5 at the time was the version I started with. Of course, I believe they went through GameMaker 8 and then it became GameMaker Studio, which it is today. And it was very beginner friendly. Not that it taught very good like like principles or disciplines for coding because the GML language is very loose with its syntax. But like I started making sprite games, stealing every sprite I could from Spriter's resource, and making Metal Slug games that were 40 times worse than Metal Slug, and Super Metroid knockoffs that were way worse than Super Metroid. And it just kind of started there and then evolved and grew, and I started to learn how to do my own sprites and started learning pixel art, and and I actually didn't switch over to Unity and C Sharp until 2016. So that was like I probably used GameMaker from like 2006, 2005-ish, all the way up until 2016 when I finally switched over to 3D. And that was like starting fresh, brand new language, never touched 3D before. I had never touched modeling before. And my God, actually, actually, my Facebook memory yesterday was when I posted my very first model, and that was hard to look at compared to. I mean, I'm not a great modeler by any means now, but my God, that was bad. But anyway, so yeah, and then that's just kind of working on that, and here we are today.
Thank you for sharing all of that. That's really interesting. Uh, starting with PowerPoint, killing your computer, and you know, moving to that perfectly legal copy of Flash, and moving on and on and on. So thank you for sharing. The point A to point B. Now, based on what sounds like a very interesting and varied uh, experience. Is there any advice you could give for those seeking to get into the industry? And I'm not gonna let you say don't do the PowerPoint thing just because I think that's a
No,
rite of passage for
you
most
have
people.
to start in PowerPoint. You have to start in PowerPoint. That's where everyone gets their start. John Carmack, or sorry, John Romero started in PowerPoint, and you can just edit that out. The fact that I just used the wrong name there is gonna get me in trouble. Anyway, um, I would say, and this is what I usually tell people who are trying to get into like game development or like coding in general, is like and and this is probably more of an issue for like younger folks than it is for people getting into it as an adult, but like start with a realistic scope. I think everyone or a lot of people that I've talked to who are like wanting to get into game design, they get into it because they have a game that they really really love, and and they want to like make that game again. Like so for a long time it was like people were getting into it because they wanted to make their own um they wanted to make their own Minecraft, for example. Like that was a really big one for a while. Everyone wanted to make a voxel game, but it's like when you first start out, like you're going to start with Hello World. You're going to start with the rollerball tutorial in Unity. You're going to start with Pong, and like you have to start small because you have to learn the ins and outs, and you have to learn the essentials, and you have to learn the principles of this, the coding language you're in and the engine you're using. And I'm learning stuff about C# all the time. I literally just learned about like virtual and override functions like a month ago. Like I just started learning about like abstract voids or abstract functions or classes. See, I don't even know what to call them. I just learned about the word abstract as it as it applies to C# like 2 weeks ago. So like just be go into it with a realistic scope and understand that like you're going to start small because that's just what you do. But probably my biggest advice because I think a lot of folks when they first look at it, they get into it and they're like, I want to make the next Halo or I want to make the next whatever game it is that they really love and they're really passionate about. And then they get in there and they realize that like, oh, 3D modeling is its own thing, and coding is its own huge thing, and netcode like multiplayer netcode is a complete mess. And so there's a lot of things that have to come together, and these games are made by huge teams, sometimes with like 100 or 200 people on these big AAA projects. So just meter your expectations and really focus on one small thing you could do, like if there's like an idea you have for a fun little like arcade shoot 'em up or something like that, like start there. Or something that what I've always done to kind of get started in engines is I just work with like the tutorials that like like for example Unity comes with a very common, there's like a first person shooter tutorial and a like a top down survival shooter tutorial that used to be really common with the older versions of Unity. I'm not sure if they're still like the go-to's, but you just like go through those obviously and you learn everything that they have to offer, and then at the end when you have the finished example project you start to try and build on it by kind of reverse engineering the stuff that you've just done. So like you finish the first person shooter tutorial and then you're like, okay, well I want to make this enemy shoot faster. I want to make a bigger version of this enemy. And so you're kind of taking like a foundation of what's there and you're kind of working with code that's already been established. So that way you can kind of dig into existing functional code and look at it and figure out how it works and why it works. And then you just kind of make changes and evolve what you kind of have there instead of trying to build something entirely from scratch where nothing is working and you don't have any like building blocks to start with. That's kind of how I started off with Unity and started off with GameMaker. Was just I think in like the entire first year that I worked with GameMaker I was just like modifying their platformer tutorial over and over and over and over again. It was just like, I'm going to take this platformer tutorial and I'm going to make Metal Slug. I'm going to take this platformer tutorial and I'm going to make Super Metroid. I'm going to make Mega Man. It's just kind of that same thing over and over again.
And thank you for that advice. It's I always like hearing that that is reinforced, only because when you look at some of the game development, like Reddit, for example, or other places, and you'll have people be like, "Well, what's your advice to someone that isn't starting out?" They're like, "Well, what's your advice?" And always it's a very similar thing, said in different words or said, to go about it in different ways. And you always always without fail have one person say, "Well, why bother starting slow? Just go big." And it's like, it makes me happy to see, to have people say effectively what you have said in different ways, with different examples of how to start to get big, or what have you, just because it really just continuously emphasizes that this is like a hard earned lesson that everyone has. And you should save yourself the absolute nightmare and just take this wonderful advice that everyone is trying to shout at you when you just don't want it. I don't mean that you as you personally, just you as the
Yeah, yeah.
generalized.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously I'm not a professor of game design or any kind of aficionado on the topic. That's just kind of what's worked for me, and kind of the advice I've shared with friends of mine that want to get into game dev is, at least when I was younger, a lot of it was people who are like, well, I really want to make a Halo, and it's like, well, I've been doing this for like 4 years and I can't make a Halo, so like I don't think it's gonna be the first thing that you do. So maybe dial your expectations back a little bit. But it's just like you can't skip straight to a finished product without learning all of the essentials and all the things that that make the finished product work, and a lot of it's a lot of those principles and disciplines and ins and outs of the system and syntax of the language and all that fun stuff that you just have to brace yourself for. It's the finished product. The creative parts of it are really fun, and the finished product is great to enjoy. But in order for there to be a functional finished product, you have got to put in the work. So
Exactly. And I really liked the advice that you gave on taking like a tutorial after you finish it, and then kind of throwing stuff at the wall in that to see what works. Only because it to me that sounds a lot like taking risks. Some may be small, some may be big, but in like a very safe environment. Because at the
right.
very least, you know what worked to begin with, and you can always dial it back to where it worked last to go, "Oh, okay, this doesn't work, but I can try this instead."
Right. Yeah. It was always refreshing to cut, because if you build off of a tutorial that has documentation, usually that documentation is going to explain why a lot of the code is in place. So like, if you look at a bit of enemy AI and you don't really understand how, like what is this raycast that's here? What is raycasting? This doesn't make sense to me. You can go back and look at the documentation, and not only is it going to explain what raycasting is, it's going to explain why you use it in this scenario. Like this is how we determine enemy sight lines, that kind of stuff. And the Unity tutorials, at least, were always really well documented. So, again, I unfortunately haven't, or maybe fortunately, haven't had to dive back into tutorials in a very long time. So I'm not sure if those ones are still available. But the Unity's got a absolute buttload of documentation, so I'm sure that there's something else there, and boundless YouTube tutorials and whatnot. But yeah, just I mean, don't be afraid to lean on existing resources, especially like if you're getting started with. Well, I'm just going to use Unity as the example here. Like, don't be afraid to download like free graphics and stuff from the asset store. Like it's going to hamper your personal development if if you spend forever trying to find like the perfect model or something when you could just be grabbing free assets and rolling. I'm not advocating like asset flip games. Like if you have a good artistic vision for a game, you should definitely make it happen. But if you want to learn how to code a first person shooter, you shouldn't let programmer art stop you. There's free assets out there for a reason to get people kind of up and running and off the ground. So just don't be afraid to lean on tutorials, don't be afraid to lean on documentation, and don't be afraid to grab that nice free model pack.
Again, and thank you very much, because that also is fantastic advice that I think, if like me personally, if I were to try and make a game, I would, that advice would have been fantastic to know, only because my artistic capabilities are not that great, and that in the past when I made attempts was always my wall. And had I just been smart enough to know that I could have just found some free assets, it would have, what I'm doing now might have been different. I'm not saying it would have made a huge change in my life,
Yeah.
but it could have changed some things.
No, it's like I mean like Phasmophobia, which is one of my favorite games right now. So we'll have that to talk about later. Like almost the entire game was like assets, like pre-made like Unity assets, but it didn't matter because in that case, like the assets did what they were meant to do, and the developer used them to create this great experience of a game. And like the game isn't toting its wonderful art design. It's not toting its realistic environments. It's toting tense cooperative ghost hunting, and that it delivers on. And so the only people that are going to know that it's using assets are other developers who have also seen those assets before. But like didn't stop it from being a phenomenal game. So you can't. And so I wouldn't say that you can pitch a game as like having this rich handcrafted environment and world, and the entire thing is just stuff that you downloaded. But it's I don't think that every game needs to sell itself on its art. I think the indie and retro revival has shown us, if anything else, that's can be the opposite. I mean, like you give the example of Minecraft, which by nowadays it has had all of its sprites redone and a lot of its texture work redone. And but I mean, like Minecraft starting out was about as basic as it gets, but the gameplay experience itself was something totally unique. So yeah, I mean, don't let art hang you up, and don't don't be afraid to lean on those assets that are there for you.
Definitely. Now, you did, your current favorite game. So why don't we get more about Phasmophobia?
Okay. Yeah, I'll gladly talk about Phasmophobia. So I wrote down for my two current favorite games. I wrote Phasmophobia and then also Resident Evil 4 VR. And Resident Evil 4 is one of my favorite games of all time, and I'm a big VR believer, big VR pusher. So the fact that Resident Evil 4 came to VR and was phenomenal has that's been taking up a lot of my time. But Phasmophobia has been like my obsession since it came out last year. It is such a unique experience, and just like it was really, really refreshing to see a horror game that wasn't the jump scare streamer bait kind of horror game that, excuse me, has kind of, I don't want to say plagued the industry because I know there's a lot of people who do enjoy them, but has dominated the industry since like Five Nights at Freddy's kind of became this big kind of symbol for being able to generate easy content on YouTube or on Twitch or whatever. So to have Phasmophobia, which is a game that is effectively jump scare free outside of organic events like the ghost decides to, shut a door in your face or appear right in front of you, but it's all, it's just like it's so cool, and it's all the randomization and the co-op experience with your friends, and it's a really really well designed game. And I'm I'm honestly like I'm really really jealous of the developer who came up, or the developer of the game who came up with the idea, because like man, did it take off. That game has so many people playing it still, and like so many concurrent players, and like just thousands and thousands of overwhelmingly positive reviews. It's a really cool game. Have you played it at all yourself?
I I personally have not. I am not a huge fan of horror games.
Gotcha.
I've been trying to get into them. I've been playing some of the Dread X collections because I'm using that as my
Uh-huh.
introduction. Because they're a good spattering of different approaches, right? In terms of some are just off the wall horror things like Squirrel Stapler. And then some are a little more traditional, and some are a little more building up the suspense and what have you. But I have a few friends that have played Phasmophobia, and he he has nothing but good things to say to it. Um, in a very interesting way of playing it, but yeah,
Yeah. It's a very, I would argue that it is itself like a very good introduction to horror games, because like a lot of like gosh, like 80% of the horror and Phasmophobia is just like it's like you and like what you make of the experience. Because like I have a couple friends that I play it with, and it doesn't scare them at all. Like they just kind of like run around. They're kind of playing the game just to get hunted by the ghost. And Phasmophobia scares the crap out of me still. Like I get so tense when I'm in there trying to gather evidence, and I know my sanity is low, and I know that like we're getting close to the point where we can be hunted. But like it doesn't have any jump scares. It doesn't have any like really big loud in your face stuff. It's just a very organic tense horror experience that like, and it's just like this like like the ghost is invisible most of the time, and you don't know where it is, and you're just kind of hearing things kind of go bump around you and trying to figure out, if did that door just move, did that just move, like trying to track evidence down. And but knowing in the back of your head that like the longer you're in there, the more at risk you are of like of getting attacked. And it's just it's so fun. I really like it.
Yeah, I'll definitely keep that in mind as something to take a look at, just because I have been interested in it. Like I said, just I'm kind of slowly introducing myself into that scene, but hearing that it could be a very good introduction to that genre or what have you, that kind of moves it up on my own personal meter of things to try.
Yeah, it's a good horror game for people who don't do well with jump scares like me, and people who aren't into like horror that kind of delves more into like like the violence and gore, like the zombie shooters and the like. It's a very good just like mystery game and puzzle game, kind of trying to figure out what kind of ghost it is based on the evidence that they leave, and if you can't get all the evidence, trying to kind of decipher the ghost behaviors. So it's got a very good element of just like emergent, surprising gameplay, and a good like puzzle element to it. But then also there is the bonus of it being really, really creepy on top of that.
Well, yeah, thank you very much for that recommendation. Like I said, I'm going to move it up on my list of things to look at, knowing that it's maybe not as harsh or as what have you as I initially thought.
Yeah, it's also really cool, like understanding it from like a code standpoint too, like kind of just observing the ghost behaviors and kind of knowing how a lot of that stuff works on like the back end is kind of cool too. Which is the same thing with like Minecraft. Like eventually, I feel like you stop enjoying Minecraft as like this really cool new fresh world, and you start looking at everything in terms of like mechanics, like do I plant this next to this in my farm so I can get the maximum grow speed, or in Phasmophobia it's like, okay, well we could light a candle in this room to prevent our sanity drain, but we know that if it's this kind of ghost, lighting a candle gives us a 10% higher chance to be hunted. And so yeah, if you ever want to play it, give me a shout. I will be your guide into that world.
Well, I definitely might take you up on that if you're with your offer. So, Jason, we've talked about your current favorite game, and Resident Evil 4 VR as well. Uh, if you don't mind, I'd like to maybe step it back a little bit and maybe talk about your favorite games as a younger Jason, and why those games were your favorite games.
So my favorite game of all time is and always has been Super Metroid for the Super Nintendo. It was, I think, the first game I played, but it was for sure the first game I ever beat. I don't know how I beat it as young as I was, but I definitely know I beat it before I was out of kindergarten, so I would have been like 5. So I don't know. I don't know if my dad helped me get past really difficult parts in it or what, but I know I beat it. But it's just it's as a kid, it just engrossed me. Just like it was just it was like it's I mean it's a great game. So as a kid, it was really engrossing, and it's a fairly accessible game too. It doesn't have a whole lot of really hard platforming. It's pretty generous with health and missiles and stuff like that. It's got great soundtrack and a really it just engaging world and great sprite work. And so as a kid, it really drew me in. But then as as a someone getting into game design, it's just like it's such an interesting and amazing game from like a design standpoint. Like everything about it's just done so well. Like the pacing is great, and like just the little subtle lessons that the game teaches you as you play it without having like hand holding tutorials is great. And like the subtle storytelling in the game without there's not a ton of story there, but it's like you just kind of get to explore this world and learn about it as you go, and there's no like cutscenes or text boxes to read. And it's just like, and then just as a Super Nintendo game, like from like a technical perspective, just all of the sprite work that went into it, and all of the just everything about it. It's such a cool game, and such a cool piece of like gaming history. But yeah, Super Metroid is definitely my all-time favorite. I'm still a big fan of the Metroid series, but nothing has ever come close to Super Metroid in terms of like sheer enjoyment. A lot of that's probably nostalgia, but I play through Super Metroid like 4 times a year, which is if I'm ever having a slow Saturday, I'm like, I'm gonna play through Super Metroid again.
With mentioning that, what is your time right now?
So I'm not a big speed runner. So I usually try to go for as many items as I can. I usually beat it in about 3.5 hours with about 90% item collection is kind of my median time.
I'm not huge into the scene, but that's a real like because I know I do know Super Metroid is a relatively if you know what you're doing, it's a relatively straightforward, relatively short game. But
Right.
that's a pretty decent time for 90%, I think.
Yeah, it's I feel like every now and again I really screw up my routing and I just like completely forget to grab something and then have to, backtrack halfway across the map, which if you were a speedrunner would probably be a reset. But I still like I don't think I've ever 100%ed the game because I'm not sure that I know where every single power up is, and I just recently replayed it again before I played Dread, and I found a pickup that I've never found before because I've never like used a map to try to 100% everything. So I know that there's probably like two or three more that I've just literally never found before. And this time playing through Resident Evil 4 in VR, I found like two or three items that I've never found before, and I've played that game many many times. So that's been really cool too.
I imagine playing that game through in VR would make it much easier for some of the things to be seen, only
Yeah.
because,
Yep.
you when I played it on the Wii, so I was playing it on a 480 interlace.
Right.
And like that's not really graphics to write home about today. So, it was just me sitting on like a CRT TV squinting like I know there's something over here that I'm supposed to be doing or finding, when you're shooting the
Yep.
medallions or whatever. And I
Yeah.
imagine the VR would make that much easier. You're not sitting there with your nose right against the screen going, is that something I need to go shoot or not?
That's right, because you get to go put your actual nose up against the thing, which has been really cool. Because like they Armature did a really good job of like you kind of like upresing and increasing the level of detail in the world of Resident Evil 4 and getting to look at everything like up close and kind of like look around at your leisure without being restricted by the third person camera or the 480i display resolution. It's so cool, and there's like so many little details that I never noticed before um, that you can pick out in VR. But um, yeah, I would say, well, Super Metroid's probably one of my favorite game from childhood. I would say that Resident Evil 4 is one of my like all-time favorites as well. Probably not as much as Super Metroid, but because I feel like one of the things that makes a game like a favorite game for me is it has to be a game that doesn't have any parts that I don't want to play, like parts of the game that you just really don't like. And every time you play through the game, you're like, ugh, like I'm probably gonna log off and stop playing once I get to this part. And Resident Evil 4 only has one part like that for me, and that's the stupid hedge maze with all the dogs in it. Um, and in VR, it wasn't that bad, but in Pancake with the horrible turn speed, oof, yeah, that's not a good one. But yeah, so yeah, Super Metroid. To answer your question, favorite game of all time. Played it as a kid, loved it.
So I'm gonna follow this up. Your favorite game of all time as a kid. Current kind of or more current favorite games. But you know, is there a game that you have that is like your comfort game? And I say that from the standpoint of like, do you have a game? And it could very well could be Metroid. So if that's the case, by all means, you can just say that and we can move right on. But like, do you have a game that if no matter what, no matter how you're feeling, no matter what's going on in your life, if you put that in to whatever console or boot it up or whatever, that you are going to immediately be brought back to that moment of when you first played it, or like you're the have all of the senses in your brain start firing, and like let's say it was Metro and you got it on a Christmas morning and you boot it up, and like that brief moment when it's starting up, your brain is firing off and you're smelling the Christmas cookies or whatever, like do you have a game like that, and if so, do you mind sharing it?
Yeah, so I mean, Super Metroid definitely falls into that category. But there's also um, I feel like Link to the Past really fits in that category. Any game that like is just easy to just turn on and play, um, kind of fits that bill for me. But Link to the Past was I don't I don't remember if I ever actually owned it as a kid because I know I rented it from the video store a lot, and so I have a lot of really fond memories of just like the soundtrack of Resident Evil 4, or sorry, of Link to the Past, and the intro jingle playing, and just like remember like going to the video store. It was a few blocks from our house where I grew up, and my parents would rent, like on the weekend, and my parents would rent a movie to watch that night, and I would get a Super Nintendo game, which was pretty much always Link to the Past, and then just like booting that up. So Link to the Past is a very comfy, nostalgic game. But I think nowadays, like, I think Minecraft is a really big, just like, just sit down and just like zone out and just play kind of game. For comfort, as in terms of like, I'm stressed out and I don't want to have to play a game that's gonna take a lot of thought, or a lot of focus, or is going to be really difficult and is going to frustrate me. I feel like I like to just get a couple buddies and hop on Minecraft and just like play a Saturday away. And I definitely miss like the very first time that I played Minecraft, like just not really knowing what anything was or what to do or any of the recipes, and just being like really really surprised and immersed by this infinite voxel world that you could dig down, because it was really kind of a first of its kind game. I really miss that, but it's still a really good, just jump in, fire up a server, your friends can hop in when they're available, and just kind of play the weekend away. So that's a very good like de-stressing game for me. Not so much comfy as in like the nostalgic factor, but comfy is in the way of just kind of shut the brain off and just dawdle around and do some mining and build a house and start a farm, enslave a bunch of villagers, sell all your produce to them, all the relaxing things.
So yes, thank you for sharing. First and foremost, thank you for sharing that. I'm always, I know that with some of that question, especially, there's a bit of vulnerability to it. But thank you for sharing, for what for sharing all of that. Um, yeah, on the topic of Minecraft, only because you mentioned enslaving the villagers, I
Right.
feel the need to share this story because it's been a while that I've had got to share this with anyone. And I think you might appreciate it. So years back, a friend of mine, we started, he was on a server, I joined him, and he, for whatever reason, found an island that took, about 20 minutes of actual walking to get to, even with his little bridge. And he decided
Uh-huh.
on that island that he set up this castle, effectively, that he wanted to have um, villagers set up a market, and there was no villagers around. So naturally, we spent 3 days digging down and then out under effectively the ocean. We popped up, luckily found a village, and then in the end we ended up sending like the entire village back. We were, as we're doing this, we're letting them repopulate with a farm for them, sending them back via minecart that was automatically bringing them up, dumping them into a pit. Then we would sort them manually. Okay, you're a good one, push them into a car stall. If they weren't, we got
Lava.
yeah, basically, we got the ingenious idea to make a pit in the middle of the room with a switch that opened up. It was glass topped. It would open up, drop them in, close it, fill it with water, um, drown them, and then drain the water and drop them into lava afterwards. Because it's not really insult until lava's involved, right?
That's right. You got to destroy their drops and their experience too, to really really just send the whole thing home.
Well, when they wanted, like a diamond, and they wanted to give you a piece of paper for it, they were kind of asking for it. That was our
Yeah.
opinion.
Yeah. Yeah, we really like to set up we used to do the, I don't think you can do it anymore, but we used to do the turbo Scrooge method, where you would build like the 5 by 5 houses that had 8 doors on them, and that made the villager think that there were
Yep.
8 houses, and they would just repopulate like crazy. But nowadays we usually do the thing where you, like, if you're playing on hard, I think you can infect and cure villagers over and over again to like make their prices get lower and lower, to the point where you can sell them like a potato for an emerald. And usually, I don't think we've ever gotten there, but our goal, our like end game, our artificial end game for Minecraft, is to get to the point where we have a beacon pyramid, a max level beacon pyramid made entirely of emerald blocks. That's usually like our, like, when we get to this point, we're probably done with the server. But yeah, I think my favorite memory of Minecraft ever is there was a period in my second year, or between my first and second year of college, where I was unemployed. I got a job at a PC repair shop, was super excited about, and then it closed a week later, and that sucked. Um, so I had a period where I didn't have a job, and we just ran this like we did like a clan war server. We did extreme, like the extreme biomes where like the biomes are huge, and we found a seed where it was like a really small, like maybe like 50 blocks across island with a couple of trees on it, which was originally just like 2 blocks in the middle of the ocean. And then there was like 8 kilometers of ocean around us on any side. And there were like 8 of us on this island, and we had just like divided off into like two separate clans. And we like didn't really PvP each other a whole lot, but we were like very territorial, and we would like trade for resources. Like we built like a trading hall where you could like throw the item that you wanted to trade into like a glass container, and then both parties had to flip a lever to accept the trade, and then it would like transfer them to the other side with pistons. And it was just super fun because it was like there was like 8 of us on there. We all just had a ventrilo server running, and would and just like whenever people were online, they were online, and when they had to go to class or go to work or whatever, and like it just we just played on that server for like weeks. And it got to the point where we were getting really really crappy with each other and like invading each other's bases. And like we had dug a tunnel that led out underneath their valuables chest. And this was back when chests were still a full block instead of a partial one, so you couldn't see below it. And so every time they would come back from a mining trip, we would go into our secret tunnel and go beneath their base and skim a few diamonds and a few valuables off of their haul. And yeah, it was a really good time. And then I got a job, and I didn't get to play as much.
You know, thank you for sharing that. You know, it's always great to hear um, about video games borderline destroying friendships.
Oh yeah.
So, Jason, I don't want to keep take up too much more of your time and keep you around. However, you know, there was something you had indicated you did want to talk about earlier on, and that was, you know, a popular game that just didn't click. And I think you kind of alluded to that as well earlier. So what is a popular game that just didn't click with you?
I feel like I've talked about this in like every podcast I have been invited to, and that's that I did not like Doom Eternal. I could not get into it. And it really sucks because like I loved Doom 2016, loved it. I've played it through, like it's one of the games I play through like every year. And I it just everything about it just clicked with me. Like the and that is one of those like, subtle kind of no hand holdy games in terms of like storytelling. And it's just there's so many different ways that you can play it, just depending on like which runes you get and which kind of guns you specialize in. And it's the environment all feels like a very real environment. Like it's like realistic spaces. Everything doesn't feel like a giant arena all the time. And just I really enjoyed it. And then Doom Eternal came along, and I was super psyched for it. Watched all the trailers, like listened to all of the soundtrack previews that came out, which are still great. um and then I picked it up and I played it, and like 10 minutes in I was like, no, this ain't it. I don't like this. And it was like from the moment I saw the first like spinning glowing item pickup, I was like, oh no, what have they done? And I just couldn't get into it. Like it's a very well put together game, very polished. It looks gorgeous. It sounds amazing. The audio design is great. The music is great, but the gameplay just did not click with me. It was so gimmicky. Like the game just wanted you to play a certain way, and I can't. And I know that there's a bunch of different weapons you can use and a bunch of ways you can approach combat, but it's like like you fight the arachnotrons. It's like one of the first enemies you fight. And if you don't shoot it in the weak point, like it's like, oh, you can shoot the turret on its head to deal more damage. And it's like if you don't shoot the turret on its head, you'll run out of shotgun shells because the game only gives you like 10 to start with, or 16, or however many it is. And it's like, okay, so right off the bat, the second enemy that you face, like right after the weak zombies, the second enemy you face is one that if you don't shoot it in the weak point, you run out of ammo. And I was like, this does not bode well. But it was just like the overall design of the game, like it felt a lot more like Serious Sam in the way that like every single level didn't feel like a real organic place that you were in, where like history had occurred and stories had been carried out. It was like it was arenas. It's all arenas. Everything's an arena. It's like the old, I think like Yahtzee makes the joke about like rooms full of chest high cover, in all those third person shooters from the late 2000s. But it's like it's just it just didn't feel like you were playing an experience anymore. You weren't like living out this thing that the Doomslayer went through. You were now playing like an arcade game. It was like the big spinning glowing power ups and the big or big open arena designed areas, and then just all of the gimmicky fights. And it's like in Doom 2016, it's like you have the chainsaw if you like need to recover ammo. But in Doom Eternal, it's like, no, you have to use the chainsaw. Like, you have to recover ammo by using a chainsaw. You cannot go through a level and just be a good shot. You'll still run out of ammo. You have to use the chainsaw to get ammo back. It's like, okay. And then it's like, oh, but you also have to use this flame cannon to get armor. And you have these grenades, and you also have this other grenade, and you have this launcher on your back too, and it fires two different kinds of grenades. And like, I mean, it was too much for me. And it's like it's fine to give the player all of those options, but Doom Eternal like requires you to use them all, and it's just what just didn't click for me. And I tried it on three separate times. I started it over, really tried to get into it, and every single time I got frustrated in just the first area. The fact that you can't punch zombies to death kills me. Like in Doom 2016, your melee is functional. Like you can beat imps and zombies to death because you're the Doomslayer. You're a demon killing machine. But in Doom Eternal, like you spawn in the very first area, in the very first level, and there's like these little scrawny limping zombies, and you can't melee them to death. Like if you punch them in the face, there's this big meaty satisfying punch sound, and then they just kind of like stagger a little bit, and then they just keep coming. And so it's like there's not even a way to go through and melee them. And it was really disappointing because I was really looking forward to it, and it really just didn't click with me. But again, that's not me saying that Doom Eternal is a bad game. I mean, you can look at the reviews for it. Clearly, there's a lot of people that enjoy it a lot, and it's very well put together. A very talented team worked on it, but I just couldn't get into it, and that's kind of how I'm feeling now about Back for Blood too. I'm really, 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 really disappointed with Back for Blood, and I played so much Left 4 Dead. Like I bought it when it launched on 360, the first one, and then bought it when it launched Left 4 Dead 2, and then bought both of them on PC. And I have sunk so many hours into them. One of my favorite games of all time. So much fun to play. It's so accessible. It's so simple, but also just like it's so well done. And then Back for Blood, got announced after years and years of no new Left 4 Dead's on the horizon. And of course, same studio. I was like, there's no way they can screw this up. And I've been really, really disappointed with it too. And it's just like, I don't know, like it feels like there was a lot. The original had a lot going for it in terms of like just like the gameplay was like deceptively simple. I mean, it's a horde shooter, so it's not like there's a lot of like deep nuance to the gameplay. But it was just, it's like enemies had distinct looks and functions. So like, crowd control and prioritization was easy. You had like proper musical cues when different enemies spawned. All the special infected had very distinct looks and distinct functions. So you knew based on where you were and how much health you had, and based on your surroundings who you needed to target first. And Back for Blood just kind of dropped that entirely. Every single zombie just kind of looks like the same mound of weird gray flesh, but then like each special infected also has like three different subtypes. And so if I see a guy with a big arm, I don't know if he's the guy with the big arm that grabs you, or the guy with the big arm that punches you, or the guy with the big arm that slams the ground. And then like and then it's not, it doesn't feel very inspired. And the gunplay, it feels like they really went for the kind of like wide as an ocean, deep as a puddle thing, where you've got a whole bunch of different guns, but none of them really do anything special. And like, I don't know why you would use an SMG at all, because the SMGs have magazines of like 18 rounds, and all of the assault rifles do more damage and have larger magazine sizes to start. And then the difficulty curve is ridiculous. Like the recruit difficulty is so pathetically easy that you could probably solo it without breaking a sweat. I know that we ran through like the first two acts without any trouble. I don't think we lost anybody a single time. And so we're like, okay, well this is pitifully easy. We shouldn't jump it up to the next difficulty. And oh my god, the the jump in difficulty is absolutely absurd. And it's not just like enemies deal more damage, or it's enemies take more damage to put down. It's just like the game just throws all balance out the window. It's like you've got so many mutators and modifiers on each map that you like you don't really know what you're going into, which is good for replay in terms of like, keeping things fresh and randomization. But the veteran difficulty requires so much planning and so much like leaning on the card system to like build a class that you can get completely screwed over if you get like the wrong mutators, like if you get a mutator where the enemies are on like explode when they die, then suddenly your up close and personal melee class becomes completely useless. And it's just I don't know. And I did, of course I went online to try to figure out like, is everybody feeling this way? Am I doing something wrong? And a lot of what I see people say is that it's like, oh, for Back for Blood, you have to get good cards. Like you have to play through the game and unlock all of the cards so you can build a good deck. But it's like, okay, well, I don't want to play recruit because it's so easy that it's not even fun, and I don't want to play veteran because it's so ridiculously unfairly painful that it's also not fun. And so I don't understand why there wasn't like a normal difficulty for like I'm comfortable playing shooters, I'm comfortable playing horde shooters, I have a full team. We want a challenge, but we also want something that's actually possible to beat. I mean, some of these maps we play on veteran, there's so many special infected coming at you. You literally have like zero time to breathe. You have zero time to reload. You have zero time to like check out the environment. And that was one thing that Left 4 Dead really excelled at, was that like the AI director did a great job of creating, like hills and valleys of difficulty. There were swarms and then there were rests. And during the rests, you got time to check out the environment. You got time to let your survivors dialogue play out, the story play out. You got time to like take in everything that was going on around you and take in the world. And I don't think Back for Blood remembered how to turn off the zombie spawners, because it's just like it's just nonstop, or it's the complete opposite and it's not spawning anything. And that's the really frustrating thing for me, is that if I'm playing a map like, or if I'm playing any other game, we'll take like the boss fights in Metroid Dread, for example. The boss fights in Metroid Dread are tough. Well, for me, they're tough because you have to learn the boss's patterns. You can't just do like Super Metroid and have so many energy tanks that you can just power through it. You have to learn the patterns, you have to dodge, you have to have good timing. And so they're difficult and they can be frustrating, but they're the same each time, So it's like, if I die to this boss, I keep trying it, I learn his patterns, and eventually you take it out. But you can't do the same thing in Back for Blood because the director is so ridiculously random. And it's like, we would play a map, and there would be like a giant boss zombie that would spawn immediately out of the safe room. And we've all got like tier 1 weapons. So it just like, we use all of our ammo on this thing. And so, we take it down. We've probably lost 2 survivors already and had to revive them. And because of the trauma system, those survivors now have like half of their max health. And we don't, the shop is already closed, so we can't buy more ammo. And there's no med kits that can restore like that lost permanent health. And so it's like, okay, so now we're at the beginning of this super long map, and the team has been crippled by this like boss encounter. And there's like, what do we do now? Do we just suicide and restart? And then you power through, and the game just like throws waves and waves and waves of zombies at you, and waves of special infected. And the special infected don't look distinct, and they don't have anything distinct about them, so you don't really know like where they are, what they're doing, or which ones you should prioritize first. And it doesn't matter because some of them take so much damage to put down that like you're basically you're just like damage trading at that point. Like you're not prioritizing targets, you're just trying to like take the least damage because there's no way to get away from it. And then your team dies because you're so strapped for resources and there's no health spawned anywhere. And so you're like, well, crap, that sucked. And you roll again. You're like, all right, we're gonna restart. We're gonna try it again. Okay, we know that we've got this giant boss monster right outside, so let's be ready for that. And then you do the level again, and the giant boss doesn't spawn. And there's a bunch of health everywhere. And the enemies, and then like the zombies, like you fight like half of how many you fought last time. And the special infected seem to keep spawning the easy ones. And so it's like, okay, I guess the director swung over easy, but now it's not challenging and it's not fun. It's like I was okay with the concept of learning how to take on this level and learning how to prioritize it, but now it's completely swung in the opposite direction where there's no challenge anymore. And so it's like the AI director just can't build balanced experiences. It's either like this absolutely painful, horrific slog through an unbalanced mess of way more enemies than you can possibly handle, or it's this weird lull where you just aren't really getting anything thrown at you, and way more health spawn than what spawned last time, and you find like a legendary weapon right off the rip, and it's just weird. It's weird, and it was underwhelming and really, really disappointing. But to Turtle Rock's credit, they did put out a pretty promising looking um, roadmap for the next few months, including a lot of balancing changes and a new difficulty mode, which I'm really hoping is between recruit and veteran, because I'd really love to give the game a shot. I'd be happy to play the game all the way through and build a good deck of cards so I can build a good class. But I don't want to do it on the painfully easy difficulty where it's just not even challenging. And I don't want to do it on the painfully hard difficulty where I keep dying and not earning experience towards my cards. So I'll probably pick it back up here in a few months and give it another try. But that was a horribly, horribly painful experience, a disappointing experience. But a lot of my friends who never played Left 4 Dead love Back 4 Blood, and so it's like, well, clearly, it got good reviews, so some people seem to enjoy it. So, but not me, man, not me.
So two questions, and at the risk of maybe opening up a wound, um, had you tried World War Z, and was that any different from for you if you had?
So I actually compared Back 4 Blood to World War Z a lot in the same kind of thing where the AI director that powers the match doesn't seem to have the same like level of tuning and nuance as the Left 4 Dead one, because like World War Z, it was fun to play co-op, but it just felt super generic. Like it didn't really feel very inspired. Um, it was fun. It was challenging. The horde mechanics looked cool to see the hordes all climbing over each other and stuff. But it just like I'm not a game reviewer, and so I can't really. I'm not really great at like picking things apart. But like Left 4 Dead had like the AI director was done so well. Like the experiences that game world created were like where you had this is kind of repeating myself, but where you had moments that were intense. You had those intense gauntlets of fighting waves of zombies and trying to get from point A to point B or waiting for rescue to arrive. But you also had moments where you were exploring, you were taking in the environment, you were letting the dialogue between survivors play out. And World War Z just like they were just like, no, you're here to shoot zombies. Like that's the point of our game, which is fine. Like if that's the design you're going for, but um, I think I enjoyed World War Z more than I did Back 4 Blood. It felt kind of generic to me, kind of just like not really memorable. But the difficulty was balanced so much better. Like there were a couple of maps that my buddy and I, screwed up and we had to try them again. But it never felt like it never felt unfair. It was maybe a little generic. The formula was kind of the same for most maps. So every map in World War Z kind of just felt like walk from point A to point B and shoot zombies. There weren't really I can't really remember any of the maps. Like they weren't memorable enough. They didn't have those memorable set pieces like Left 4 Dead has, like just like the really cool finale holdouts and like the like rock concert holdout, excuse me, from Left 4 Dead 2. And I don't know. Yes, they felt very similar to me. I got very similar vibes from Back 4 Blood and from World War Z, where it's a solid gunplay, solid game, solid code, but just not inspired. Just doesn't really grip you. Doesn't want to make you play it for a decade following. But
Yeah, and that's very fair considering that Left 4 Dead's 1 and 2, or the package, however you want to refer to them, is still, I believe, has a fairly decent and healthy online play. So, yeah, I can understand, and hopefully with Back for Blood, they can introduce something to kind of hit that middle ground where it works a little better for people. Um, and the other thing I wanted to mention, this, in no way is this me trying to sell you or change your opinion, or what have you for Doom Eternal. It's more just saying I understand completely what you were saying there. Because Doom Eternal it's not Doom 2016. It is a very different game, a fundamentally
right,
different game, right? Like
right,
my girlfriend tried it right after beating 2016, and I got Doom Eternal when it came out. Um, I played through it on a weekend or so. Played through on like the second hardest difficulty, did all of the challenges, everything, everything, everything. And as I'm doing that, she's playing Doom 2016. Uh, and then like she immediately goes to start it, and I knew she wasn't going to like it because I just knew. And she had a very similar approach uh, to you, where she didn't like having to try and juggle, you know, all the pieces. Because like you said, you can get out there when you're fighting the first mastermind or whatever spider bot. I forget what they're properly called, and you
Arachnotron, I
Arachnotron,
think.
thank you, and you can do it without popping off its gun, but you're not gonna have a good time with it. It's
Right.
you're gonna struggle because you're gonna have to waste so much ammo, or you're gonna have to be learning at the same time as trying to just brute force it with also the management system that the game arguably does try its best to um, bring you into gently, but it very much expects you to play it in a certain way. And if you don't play it in that certain way, all of its, all the ways that all the systems that it sets up to work well with each other don't work well when you're not playing it. Like when I'd say it's more like in Doom 2016, you kind of go into the sandbox, and they're like, here's like you kind of said a similar thing. Where in Doom 2016, you have all these weapons, you have all of this approach. It gives you, in the sandbox, they give you, 20 different shovels, 20 different sandcastle molds, and they just say, well, go nuts, do what works for you. In Doom Eternal, you get to this sandbox, and they go, well, here's this shovel, here's this mold, you can use them here. Here's this shovel and this mold. You have to use them here. And it tells you what you can do and where you can and should do it, right? And I personally, I loved Doom Eternal. I'm the last person that'll say it's, that people that don't like it are wrong, because I've actively sold people on not playing it because of um, you know, knowing that they're going to have a similar set of feelings as you do. Like for example, my father, um, I, he wants to play it, and the only thing I can say to him is not to play it unless he can get it for like $15. Only because
Mhm.
I know he's not going to enjoy it, and he'll do his best to power through it. But I just know him as a old man in his 60s now, that he doesn't have the reaction time necessary to do a lot of some of the stuff. Like, I don't know how far you got into it, but there's a fair amount of platforming things that you have to do that are somewhat technically precise, and I don't think you'll be able to do them, um, even on the easiest setting. Like there's so much of that game that I, well, I think as I said, they did a great job with it. That it's too much of a divergence that I think it would alienate some of its audience. Well, I shouldn't say think, because people, you exist, people like you exist that say it, but like it alienates some of its audience that wanted more of Doom 2016, and instead, as you said, they kind of gave an arena shooter that is set up in such a way that it's a puzzle game. And like I said, I'm not in any way trying to argue that you should try it again or look at it differently, because you know I 100% see and agree with everything you're saying about it. And it's a shame that that's what happened, if only because it's the Doom franchise, and it's kind of, if the tables were turned and it was me that wasn't able to enjoy it, and I you know, grew up tolerating and somehow making it through Doom 3, um, and everything else, I would be like incredibly crestfallen that this staple of my childhood just wasn't something that was made for me anymore. You know, so like
Yeah.
that's what I mean. Like in no way am I trying to say oh, you should look at it from different set of view or anything like that. I'm just saying I 100% understand where you're coming from, and like not against you, but it's just I'm
Oh yeah,
it's
that's fine.
I'm disappointed that that's what happened, because it's if I were in your shoe, I would just be incredibly upset that it wasn't made for me to enjoy anymore, you know?
Yeah. Well, so the fact of the matter is that like I am, for all intents and purposes, kind of a casual gamer. Like I play a lot of different games, and I feel like I'm very invested in the gaming scene. But like I don't have a lot of free time to play video games anymore. You know, I'm getting old and I have responsibilities and life things to do. And so any game that requires me to get good, I'm just not going to be able to get good at because I just don't have the time. And so which sucks because like the Souls series, like Dark Souls games, I love them from an aesthetic standpoint. Like I think that they are aesthetically just absolutely gorgeous games, and I've tried one and two several times, and I do okay when I'm running around in the main world and fighting basic enemies because I feel like for the most of the time in Dark Souls you can be like 70% proficient at the game and still get by. But then in the boss fights, it's like if you screw up one time, you're dead. And I'm just not that good at games. Like I don't have the reaction time, I don't have the skill. And so like those and that's kind of where like Dread, like Metroid Dread has started to trip me up because it's like out running around in the overworld, you can get energy pickups from enemies, and you can forgive your screw ups by taking some time to recharge. But the boss fights, you don't have a lot of room for screw ups. Like the most of the bosses can take like one energy tank per hit, and so you have to learn the patterns, and that that frustrates me because I'm just not that good. And so I just like I play a lot of casual games, I play a lot of sandbox games, and I like to play games that um that kind of lets you develop your own play style and lets you just be good at the game in your own way. And so like Doom 2016 did that. Like Doom 2016 gave you a setup where if you wanted to be slow and precise, like if you wanted to use charge shots from the oh gosh the railgun plasma cannon, which I can't remember its name right now, and then like the heavy machine gun had a scope on it. So like if you wanted to be the guy that just like you know popped off slow shots, you could do that. If you wanted to run around and just be up close and use the chainsaw a bunch and not waste ammo, but kind of just spray and pray, like there was room for that. And then Doom Eternal kind of came up with this thing where it's like we're going to make a game that's highly technical. Like there are a lot of aspects to combat, but you have to use all of them to succeed. And I'm just that's just not the kind of game that I'm good at. And it's kind of like actually we're actually kind of bring this back around to Cultic briefly, but um, it's one of the main things I really like about Cultic and kind of the boomer shooter arena is that a very large chunk of the games that have dominated the boomer shooter revival are those fast-paced like mobility shooters where it's like you're sprinting around, you have to stay mobile and have to learn all of these different amounts of tech and all these moves in order to excel at the combat. And that's kind of what Doom Eternal was, and those just aren't games that I am A, good at, and B, interested in, because that's just not, I don't know, I don't move at that pace, and I just don't have the time to learn the games, and so it ultimately turns into a frustrating experience for me. And like I said, that's not a mark against those games. That's definitely not a mark against Doom Eternal or a mark against Dark Souls. It's just an incompatibility between me as a gamer and a human being, and the kind of time and investments and skill sets that those games require. So I will be stuck watching playthroughs of Dark Souls until maybe I retire someday and actually have the time to sit down and really get good at everything and practice it. But yeah, no, Doom Eternal was very disappointing. I kind of wish I had picked it up. I know I pre-ordered it. I wish I had picked it up for $20 and then realized I didn't really like it. But no, it and Back for Blood I both pre-ordered. But I'm not super sour about it because I know they're both great games. I'm sure to some people, and the developers worked hard on them and making them good experiences. So I'm happy to support them. But I just wish it had been a little more my flavor.
Definitely. Like I said before, I 100% understand where you're coming from, and like I believe I mentioned this to you when I first reached out, that one of the things that I liked most about the Cultic demo is that it was, and I don't mean this in any way of an insult for anyone that might hear it. It was very straightforward in that it was, it wasn't so much like a movement based shooter or any of that. It was nice, easy, like I have a gun, I'm going to shoot a guy. And I believe as well that, one of the things I liked the most about it was that it was 100% a old style game that I knew that I could send to my dad and go, you're going to like this game. It's going to be a game that you can play without getting frustrated, without getting stressed out. Like, like you as you said, having to worry about getting good. Um, that it would deliver on an old style of gameplay that would just be enjoyable and easy to pick up. And again, I don't mean that in any way of an insult, because like
No, you're fine.
I very much like the idea of that. I like the idea of some of the new, the new movement based shooters and stuff. I think they're wild, being able to, bounce all over the room like a rubber ball that's, wound a little too tight, and all of that. But at the same time, there's a lot of technicalities to that kind of stuff that, as awesome as I think it is, I I don't always want to have to sit and do that, Like, I don't, one of the things about Doom Eternal, I'll use this as an example, is, in terms of getting good, so to say, is I had to be in, I forget the terminology, but like psychologically, I had to kind of be in like a trance for it, like a meditative state
Right.
for me to play that game really well, because there's a lot of stuff, a lot of balls to keep in the air and everything. And that is a draining way to play games. And like, I don't mean that in a
Yeah.
bad way, it's fun, it's great, similar to when I tried to play Dark Souls and everything. Um and I think you would have might relate to that, but you have to be in a very specific mindset, and you have to be always on. There's no being off. And the
Yeah.
one of the things I really liked about your Cultic demo was I at no point felt like I needed to be running at like 100% on. Like, it didn't feel like I was trying to assess all of the threats all over the place, having to figure out what was going to do this, what's going to come from there, whatever. I was just able to relax and feel like I was just playing a boomer shooter, feel like I was playing a game when I was younger. And, like I said, for me, immediately when I was playing it, in my mind, I'm sitting there thinking, I can sell this game to my dad, and he's going to play it, and he's going to love it, because it's not going to be a game that he, as a as aging old man, that he's going to struggle with playing. He'll be able to put it down to easy or whatever, and he'll be able to have a blast, because from what I played so far, and from what it sounds like, it's not going to be a lot of technical aspects to make X, Y, and Z happen. So
Right.
I just wanted to
It's
mention all that as a point of what I really enjoyed and was really impressed by.
Yeah, it's cool because like while like you said, if you put it on standard or casual, the game like the gameplay is it's pretty relaxing and very forgiving of the player making mistakes. But like if you dial it up to very hard or extreme, then there is a lot there are a lot of little like bits of tech in the game that you can take advantage of to kind of make that work. Because like ammo gets a little more scarce and enemies have more health, and so you have things like making sure you're getting headshots for extra damage, or using weapons that penetrate enemies if they're grouped up tightly, or using things in the environment like explosive barrels and lanterns to set up traps, or baiting enemies into infighting with each other, or waiting getting enemies to throw dynamite at you and then picking it up and throwing it back. And so like at a on easier skills and more casual play styles, you very much can just kind of blast your way through. The game will give you enough ammo and you get enough health to kind of just let you run around and really feel like a, like a really powerful character. But then if you want to dial it up and you want to have that more, and that's kind of the thing is like a lot of people who have played Cultic and have given me feedback, a lot of them are, like are big boomer shooter aficionados, the people who play a lot of shooters. And there's a very big gap. You've got a lot of people who like I play Cultic on hard. That's like the comfortable setting for me where I feel like it's challenging. But like I had people who are like extreme is too easy, and I'm like, oh God, here we go. And it's and because there's folks that are they're used to playing like Doom Eternal on the hardest difficulty, and and they get it. Like you said, it's like you watch a video of this person playing Doom Eternal on the highest difficulty, and they're doing all these rapid movements and all these like using all these different strategies, and like you said, there's zero chance that they're not sweating while they're playing. Like that's definitely there it's an intense, like a very intense focused experience. And like that, I mean, extreme on Cultic is still not that kind of experience. Like it's not a fast frantic run and gun. It's just more of a methodical style of gameplay. Like you just have to think about how to use your environment, and be cautious about getting shot out in the open and yada yada. But then like the survival mode that I added with the Halloween update does get a little more frantic, and like I don't think I've ever gotten better than like a D on extreme. And like day two, somebody messaged me on Discord. Was like, "Hey, I got an S rank on extreme." I'm like, "Gee, cool." But I really want to see a video of them doing it because I want to see like how they play the game. Because like I test Cultic on hard, and that's the difficulty I play on. So like my play style is tailored around the hard difficulty, which is largely enemies do a little more damage and take a little more damage to put down themselves, but for the most part you can still kind of just run and gun. You don't have to be super cautious, and so that's the way I'm used to playing. But folks who boot Cultic up for the first time and immediately go for extreme difficulty, they are going for the nail biting, difficult, edge of your seat experience from the get go, and I'm just not used to that. So if I try to play Cultic on extreme, I get dead. I get dead very fast. So it's just it's going to be fun. It's going to be interesting trying to figure out what difficulties work with different people and what people find difficult and what they don't. I didn't expect somebody to S rank extreme in 24 hours, but alas, here we are. It happened. But yeah, I don't know. I always feel like there's always going to be like that discussion about like should Dark Souls have an easy mode, or should these games that are designed to be punishingly difficult experiences, should they have a mode that's more accessible for like for casual gamers like me, people who suck at games like that. And I mean, I don't know. It all boils down to accessibility, I guess. Some people feel like you're sacrificing the vision of your game, or you're sacrificing what Dark Souls is meant to be if you make it more accessible to people who aren't good at the game. And I guess that's kind of up to the fan base and the developer to decide. I'm a big accessibility person. I have I don't really subscribe to like difficulty porn, so to speak. I don't think there's much value in making your game brutally hard just so that some people can't play it. But there's clearly a very very large set of people that do subscribe to that. So um, and clearly Dark Souls have sold very well. So clearly they're doing something right.
Yes, all of that very, very good points. I think I don't really want to get into the accessibility discussion just only because that is a whole other can of worms that I think would take, a
Yeah.
very long time to discuss. However, I think I can say probably pretty well that you and I are very close to being on that same plane of mindset for it. I'm very straight up and down because I'm very much a fan of accessibility. I think there's arguments that can be for and against it, but end of the day, I always worry that by intentionally making a game that is not accessible for whatever reason, you are effectively closing the gates and creating a toxic environment. And an easy example for that one is like the get good mentality that exists around Dark Souls right out the gate. Like when it was made, the immediate argument was, well, you just have to get better. But if you're a casual player, you could be trying your best, and if you just want to experience the world and sometimes your best isn't good enough. And anyway, um like I said, I think we're closely aligned, and I just don't think that this is the time or the place to try and have that discussion, only because, as I'm sure you've had before with other people, maybe in public or in private, it is a massive can of worms that it's
Yeah.
very difficult to navigate, I think.
Yeah, and it's kind of interesting because like I think Doom Eternal has like a casual difficulty, or at least a lower difficulty level. And on one of my playthroughs, I tried playing Doom Eternal on that difficulty to see if that made a difference. And like the thing with Doom Eternal for me is that I didn't ever really find that it was too hard. I just found that I didn't enjoy the gameplay. It like wasn't an issue of them making the game like I figured if I played it on a lower difficulty, I wouldn't have to adhere quite as strictly to the way that they wanted me to play. But it's just you still kind of do. Like ammo's still really limited, and enemies, it's still very much like, no, you have to hit the weak point. You have to do this. You have to use the chainsaw. You have to use the flame belt. You have to do. It's just it just was like it's too rigid a play structure. And I think that so in that case, like, and so the segue I was trying to make was that like there's an argument to be made that maybe like Dark Souls is the same way. Maybe it's not so much about like the get good crowd being able to claim that they beat Dark Souls so much that it's like if you make the gameplay of Dark Souls casual, then is it really Dark Souls anymore? So for the argument of like I just want to experience Dark Souls, he's like, well, if you if you play through it and it's easy, then are you really experiencing Dark Souls so much? Versus where you're just experiencing the art and the world. So it can go either way. I just want bosses in Dark Souls to do a little less damage, or maybe I have two lives for the bosses because it's like I really enjoy, um like it's one of those, like you said, when you play Dark Souls, like when I would decide to just like sit down a weekend, like I'm really gonna try to learn this time, and you do, like you get really used to your weapons and the speed of your character and the timing of your dodges and your animations, and during basic combat with regular enemies it's really fun and I really get into it. But it's just like when I get to the bosses, and it's like if I screw up one time I die, and then it's not like I can just walk in and try again. The bonfire's 6 miles away, and there's 100 enemies that you have to just, like, you can be super slow and methodical and kill them all again, or you can try to rush through, but then you'll probably take a bunch of damage, and then you'll show up to the boss without full health and missing a couple of sunny D's. And yeah, so I don't know. It's just one of those things that it's a little too punishing to be enjoyable for me, especially because like most of the gaming I do nowadays is social. So I have a ton of single player games I want to play, but if a single one of my friends is online, we're gonna play Phasmophobia or 7 Days to Die or Minecraft or Ark or whatever instead, because it's like I want to be able to catch up with my friends and play games with them too, and so. But yeah, no, that would be a fun thing to discuss. But it's accessibility in games is certainly an interesting topic.
Yeah, and like I said, I unfortunately not the time and place, and like I said, I think we're more or less similar. So I'm not everything you said. I agree with. So there isn't really much I have that I would like to add beyond what you've that I agree with pretty much everything you've touched on.
Yeah. No, that's fine.
Now, Jason, as I said a little earlier, I don't want to take up too much more of your time. However, if there's anything else you wanted to throw out there, a cool game, what you're doing, something you feel more people should just be more aware of, the floor is yours. As well, please let everyone know where they can find more information about you, and I'll also include that information in the episode description.
Sure. So one of the questions you sent me was my favorite trend in gaming
Yeah,
recently.
sure.
Um, and I actually, after I talked earlier about kind of not being afraid to lean on um, like like asset packs, free models, and the like. One of my favorite trends recently that I really wanted to talk about was kind of the return of like retro games, but specifically like the PlayStation aesthetic, like that kind of like low poly, limited view, low, like low res texture, low poly model. And obviously, it's a great aesthetic for me because that's what I grew up with. PlayStation was my second console after the Super Nintendo, so that's a very nostalgic thing. But like, what I really like about the PlayStation aesthetic is that it lets people create games and really just focus on the gameplay, like the game design, because the models, like, I mean, regardless of your modeling skill, if you know how to open Blender and throw a model together, chances are you can make a half decent looking PS1 style model. And a lot of the nuance of that aesthetic is that it does kind of hide like the true artistic quality of your models. And part of the PS1 aesthetic is that some of that stuff was just left to the imagination. The textures are small, the models are blocky, and it was on a small CRT. So you've got like even myself, like I started making games when I first started doing 3D. I was kind of doing that PlayStation aesthetic because it's easy to do. It doesn't take a long time to put the models together. Um, but it's just really cool to see people creating standout experiences and really unique titles where they're able to get this gameplay idea that they have, this game idea of theirs, and they're able to make it playable. And they don't have to like sacrifice by having programmer art or more uninspired, generic looking like asset pack models, because they have this aesthetic to lean on that yes, I feel like even if you do like the PlayStation aesthetic poorly, it still will have a unique look to it, and and that can make it just interesting to look at. Even if it's not the best graphics in the world, a unique art style is generally still enough to get people to at least look at your game. So that was probably the trend that I think is really cool. Is just in general games being able to have more simplistic graphics and still be appreciated and still kind of stand out on their own. Because I think as next gen consoles and PCs improve and we have more and more teams doing photorealistic, you know, textures and models and still being able to have game development accessible to people who don't have AAA budgets and AAA art teams is really important. And I think we'd miss out on a lot of really unique ideas for games by not having a platform or not giving a voice to people who can't produce Hollywood level CGI. So I think that's something I've really enjoyed in gaming, and that's kind of been around for a while since the big like pixel art revival as well. But same kind of deal. But I think it's really cool.
I do agree with you there. I wasn't aware that it had existed for as long as it did. However, I've been seeing it popping up more often. And I agree. I think it's really nice, really interesting to see just because um, we're at a time where it's easier to make games, and I am just a huge fan of, in general, the aesthetic that we are seeing, and how, we're not getting stuff where it's just all uniform, so to say. Um it's not always the same. Like when in the PlayStation era was, had a good chunk of games that were going to look like X, Y, or Z, the Super Nintendo, the 64, the PlayStation 2, etc. Like they typically fell into those chunks, and then now we're getting, you know, games released on consoles, uh physical releases on consoles, and all of that, where just because of the age we're in now, we're getting, like you said, we're getting, older style looking games. And I'm I'm a huge fan of seeing the PlayStation era set of graphics come back, just because I think, like you said, they can leave a lot to the imagination by what they intentionally choose to cut, because now they don't have those limitations that they have to cut things. Now they can actually
Right.
cut things intentionally to create a sense of, dread or drama or whatever. Like, an older PlayStation game, a character might have had dead eyes only because they didn't have the pixel budget to give them, good proper eyes. And now they have that, but they can still choose to not, because they want those dead eyes to be something that makes you kind of feel uneasy?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think what's going to be really cool is when I think naturally, we kind of had the big pixel and pixel art revival, and now we're going into the early 3D PSX era revival. And I think what's going to be really cool is what's going to come next. I would imagine is kind of the PS2 era revival, which is where like you had, higher poly, more defined graphics, but the consoles still weren't really capable of producing, like photorealistic effects. Shaders weren't like as common or able to be done on the hardware, and so you have instead games leaning on really unique art styles. Like look at like things like gosh, like Ratchet and Clank and Jack and Daxter, and or even like the Metal Gear series. It's like you have this console and this design era where you can't really produce realistic graphics or you can't really shoot for photorealism. So you kind of establish an art style instead. And I think I'm really excited to see kind of what pops up out of that. These teams that have modelers and texturers and artists who maybe aren't like doing AAA photorealistic stuff, but they're still really good modelers and they have a good art team, and so they can produce things that look really unique and have a really unique feel to them. And so I'm really hoping that we kind of get a good solid era of unique games, or even like good like throwback titles, like if we get a revival of title of those like good old like 3D platformers, or like kind of the early style of PS2 first person shooters. But it has more, you're leaning less on the fog and the low poly count and more on just having a good solid art style that's not necessarily like realistic, it's not necessarily taxing the software, but it just looks good. And I think that'll be kind of a cool way for all of these unique indie ideas and unique indie teams that have kind of come out to create games that kind of still stand on their own visually too, and they're not just using the low poly thing as a crutch so much as they're leaning into a I don't know, a specific art style that I don't know if that makes sense. But I have a point I'm trying to make here. I'm trying to think of other games to give as an example, but I don't know. I'm excited to see what comes next.
I agree completely, and I think that optimism, I think it's the best way that that could have ended, just because there's always the chance that something can go the other way, but being able to talk so um optimistically about that future, I think is just fantastic.
Yeah, I think we got a lot of stuff, a lot of cool stuff coming too, and I think I'm going to have a very full plate pretty soon of my single player and otherwise backlog is going to get even more ridiculous than it already is. So, especially if we keep seeing this push for like VR versions of full length titles, like the like Resident Evil 4 VR and stuff like that. Because oh my God, I will pretty much spend money on any time they make a VR version of a game that I already enjoy, like the VR version of San Andreas that they teased is going to be that's going to be wild. Like these full because it's like VR kind of started in the same way that like the Wii, like the Nintendo Wii did, where it's like you're leaning on the technology and its novelty to make kind of like gimmicky games where it's like, oh wow, this is really cool. I've never played a game in VR before, or like I've never played a game on with a Wii Mote before where I can like swing it around and stuff. But then eventually like you have to move away from that, and so we saw like games like Half-Life Alyx and Boneworks and like Walking Dead Saints and Sinners and Blade and Sorcery and all these games that were like, okay, well, like how do we marry the novelty of motion controls with like the realism of being a person in like a real person in a world, like you're there, you have a physical body, you can interact with things physically, and so now we're instead of having like gimmicky arcade games and gimmicky like shooting gallery games, I'm really excited to see how these games like Doom 3 and like Resident Evil 4 and San Andreas that are already fully fledged titles that are good games that have good foundations, and they're just taking what's already a good foundation and applying the VR spin to it, like Resident Evil 4 VR. They easily, Armature Studios easily could have left all of the buttons and levers and cranks and stuff in there as just button presses, but they didn't. They're like, oh, let's let the player actually interact with all of these, and so they took the combat of Resident Evil 4 and made it translate to VR, and it translates very well. But they saw all these other opportunities for like what are ways that we can take this game world and translate it better to VR. And I think San Andreas like at the minimum, if it has like full like touch control driving, like grabbing and turning the wheel and stuff, that's going to be really cool. Because that's like my favorite part about No Man's Sky VR is that when you're flying around your ship and dogfighting and stuff, you're actually like holding the joystick and the throttle. You're not using the thumbsticks on your controller. You're actually you're in your cockpit. You're actually grasping the controls, and it's very cool. Also very nauseating, but
And yeah, I also agree with that. I'm also looking forward to the future of VR. I've played it numerous times. A friend of mine has it, so whenever I get the chance, well, pre-pandemic, whenever I got the chance, I look forward to post-pandemic. But yeah, I'm very much looking forward to personally having um, enough room to get a proper VR setup. My girlfriend has the PlayStation 4 VR, but games like Sword and Might or Sword and Magic or what have you, um, you know, those games just don't exist on that, and those are some of like the most fun games to get to experience with VR and such. So I look forward to being able to at some point experience everything else that it has and everything else that's coming, because that as well is something that I think is going to be a blast as more and more gets made.
yeah, I really hope that the Oculus leans away from the Facebook integration with the headsets, because the Quest 2 is a phenomenal headset. I like. I get people's hesitance towards Facebook. I've had an account since I was like 17, so it doesn't really bother me anymore. But like it's such like oh god, it's such a good headset. Like it's got a good picture, and it's it connects to the computer wirelessly, so I can play my PC VR games just over my router without any tethers at all, and that works great. And then it's and it's so cool. And it's like $300. It's so much cheaper than it like so much cheaper than everything else on the market. I honestly don't know how the index like stays competitive being a grand, and it still uses external lighthouse tracking and everything when the Oculus has just everything built in. It's really cool. But that I got the Oculus Touch, the CV1, I think, was my first headset, and then it died on me after about 3 solid years of use, and uh, and they didn't sell them anymore. And the Rift S was about to be discontinued, so I just jumped on the Quest 2 train, and oh boy, I'm really glad I did. It's such a cool little headset. But I'm not. Get away from that. I don't need to plug the Quest 2, but it's certainly a good. It's certainly like right now, it's probably the most attractive headset on the market. Like because the nearest competitor is probably like the Reverb 2, but it costs like twice as much and has, from what I've read, like the tracking on it is not so great and the controllers aren't as good and it doesn't offer wireless VR. And that's a wireless VR is a game changer. Not having the tethers and not getting tangled up and not having the cable like dragging on your back, kind of breaking your immersion, is a huge deal. So it means that's a big deal.
Definitely, that's thank you for the I guess the glowing praise to the Quest 2, only because, like you said, if it is able to, if it is dis removed from Facebook. I don't know the right word for disintegrated. I don't think it's the right word,
Yeah.
but that's a good thing to keep in mind, that it could be a very viable option. And um, so yeah, I'll keep that in mind, especially if it's something that they pull that chunk out of, because I as well agree that I would very much like to not have to spend $1,000 on a VR device.
Yeah. Yep. It's definitely something that I think when because like I really think it's difficult to see VR as anything but like a gimmick until you've actually like really tried it yourself and not just like tried it at Best Buy playing whatever little gallery shooter they have to demo, but like really playing like hot dogs, horseshoes, and hand grenades, or Boneworks, or one of those games that really leverages like really leverages the technology to create a unique experience. And like when when the entry price is $700 or $1,000, like it's going to be tough to talk anybody into giving that a shot. But I mean, gosh, the Quest 2 is like $299 when I bought it, and oh man, I would have. I wish I could have jumped on that back when I first got into everything because I bought the CV1 and the extra lighthouse and it was like oh, this is like $600 $700 altogether back then. And I mean, worth it. It was a great headset, but yeah,
Yeah, like I said, definitely good things to keep in mind. And yeah, like I imagine as technology goes forward and time goes forward, we're just going to see more and more options that present themselves in great ways.
yeah, for sure. I'm really excited to see. I really want to get into VR development, but it's so much harder than regular development. Like just like even just like from a testing standpoint, having to like get into your headset and like get comfortable and get situated every time you want to test something out, but also just like trying to like predict what the player is going to do with like with Pancake it's easy. Like in Cultic, when you have the shotgun out, if you left click, the shotgun's going to shoot, and if you press R, the shotgun's going to reload, and it's all animated, so there's no guesswork as to how that's going to go. But in VR, I don't know how people are going to use the weapons. I don't know. I don't know how someone's going to swing the axe. Are they going to swing it? Are they going to try to like stab people with it? Are they going to throw it? Like you have to kind of like expect what the player is going to do and provide a feedback option for it. That's like one of like the big things with Resident Evil 4 VR. One of my few complaints about it is like Leon's knife. You can't stab with it. You can only swipe with it, which is like you swiped with it in the game, so that make in the original game, so that makes sense. But like stabbing is a this will sound a little serial killer, I guess, but like stabbing is a natural motion with a pointing object, right? Like like you have a knife, it has a point. You're like if there's an enemy in front, you want to stab him with it, and but that's not like a registered movement, and it's like that's something they probably should have anticipated. Like players have a knife, they're gonna try. If they get caught in close quarters with an enemy, they're probably gonna try to stab with it. And like I don't think it would have been that much more difficult to detect movement along like the forward-facing axis of the knife as opposed to the lateral like sideways axis. So, but it's just stuff like that. Like you have to really anticipate what the player is going to do, and like and that can be a whole nother can of worms. So I'd like to get into development some into VR stuff a little more someday. I tinkered with it a bit when I first got my Oculus, but it was honestly kind of disheartening when you're like getting started with VR, and then at the same time like Half-Life Alyx is coming out and Boneworks is coming out, and all of these games that have like these really cool like VR like physical rigs for the player and like really impressive physical interactions with enemies and stuff like that, and you're like, I'm screwed. Yep, I'm gonna go back to pancake development.
Yeah, definitely. I can understand because that is, as you said, it's a whole different space, a whole different everything, right? So I can definitely understand that, and maybe hopefully in the future it's something that you are able to uh, be more ready for. I guess is the way to say it.
Yeah, just have the time to tinker with it, I guess. But anyway, I think you were trying to wrap up, and I went off on a VR tangent. So sorry about
Oh,
that.
no worries whatsoever, Jason. But yeah, I do want to let you go. I don't want to take up I don't want to take up your whole evening. Let you have some more downtime and relax before you start your next day of more development for Cultic. However, you know, just so it's out there, where can people find more information about you?
Oh, pretty much everything about Cultic and about the development gets posted on my Twitter, and that's at JSawz Games, JASOZZ, two Z's Games. And I'm sure you'll have a link to that in the podcast notes. But yeah, that's pretty much where everything gets posted at. Um, so for now, yeah, any updates on the game or development or announcements should pretty much be going there.
Awesome, and thank you so much for that because I definitely will, as you said, put that out there. I'll also make sure that the Steam page is available and easily accessible.
Cool. Yeah, there is a demo out right now. Been updated, just got updated for Halloween with a brand new survival mode that you can play over and over and over again and put all of my scores to shame apparently. So yeah, it's a good time.
Well, thank you very much for that. I personally do not think I will try and put your score to shame with that survival difficulty mode. Um, However, I encourage anyone else to try and upshow you and get what was it, higher than the D ranking.
Absolutely. Yep. Get a C or better on extreme, and you've officially done better than me.
Well, there we go. So I personally I don't think I'd be able to achieve that, but I'll leave that to the other people and to the some that have already were easily able to achieve S in 24 hours miraculously. All right, so Jason, if there wasn't anything else that you wanted to discuss, I will let you get on with your evening though, okay?
Oh, that works for me. I appreciate it. I appreciate your time, and thanks for having me.
No, Jason, the pleasure was all mine. I'm very grateful that you were able to make some time to talk to me. So, thank you so much for that. It was fun getting to talk about your favorite game, games that didn't click, and some more about Cultic.
Yeah, for sure. Anytime.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much. So again, thanks again to our guest Jason for making time to have this conversation with me, and thank you for joining us on the Red Tunic podcast, as well as a special thanks to Ronald Jenkins for the use of his music from the title track from Road Steep. And if you like this podcast and want to support it and help it grow, please subscribe or follow me on Twitter at Red Tunic Podcast to receive the latest episodes and news, and be sure to share with those you also think might enjoy it. Thanks, and until next time.